Shit.
Yeah.
So I lip read that. I feel like I should say, hey, who can hear me? Hello.
How are you, buddy? I got you. That's
Cool.
about it. I should have chat between you and me today.
Yeah.
I'm here
That's
too.
Hey, everyone but
Hey,
Cody.
can't
Everyone
see.
but Cody. Yeah.
All right, we all.
Oh,
Here
shit.
he is.
There he is.
There he is.
How are we going?
Fantastic.
Good.
It's good. Let's see if we can get some lighting. All right, how we go with homework?
Good.
Where'd you go?
What was the homework again?
What do we struggle with each day? The biggest struggle of the day.
What'd you come up with?
Me personally, last week was hard for me. I had a fair bit of back pain, so I was just managing that.
Yep. How's that back pain now?
Yeah, good, gone.
Nice. What about you, Paul? What was your biggest struggle, Paul?
Thursday, I was just my biggest struggle on Thursday was just no real struggle. I was just flat. Friday, I was just disorganized. Saturday, Sunday, I was sick. Monday, just flat. No real major struggle. Just
Yeah.
me.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing. What about you, Cassie?
Yeah, it was interesting. My biggest struggle, it was always anchored in and around my work. So I actually noticed, and it was funny following on from the information you'd shared, one of my biggest struggles is like boredom and lack of stimulation in terms of like imagination, creativity, all of those sort of things. Like I was at work and I'm like, I am so fucking bored. Like I was going mental. I had to do laps around my work because I was so bored. So yeah, like literally my biggest problem was boredom. Yeah.
Interesting.
And just having nowhere to channel the energy. I think it was probably more that. I had nowhere to channel my energy.
Yeah. So when we're looking at what our biggest struggle is, what our biggest problem is, what we're really starting to do is create awareness around what our attention is ultimately on. And that can determine what our stage of development is in that moment. And it's interesting to start to see the way that you kind of framed each of those limitations is very much filtered through being an activator in each of those. So Paul was very much just based on like just how you felt every single day. That was your struggle. Wasn't actually anything else. It was just like how you're feeling the entire time. The same with Sean. It's just like, right, well, the pain is the thing that was top of mind. There was no other struggles. It's just like how you're actually feeling in that instance. And then with Cassie, just the variety required for the activator, which you need to actually enjoy what you're actually doing. Otherwise, you just go crazy. So it's interesting to start to see how we all start to just become expressions of what our biology actually is, and we can actually create alignment between what we're doing in our life with our biology. Then we can instantly start to shift how we actually feel and how that impacts everything we actually do, and then it just becomes much more fulfilling for everything we start to do. Make sense? Cool. Was there anything specific you guys wanted to go through today?
No. Nothing off the top of my head. It's been a bit sort of just rushed in here, and then here we are. No, everything's good at the moment. My energy's good. I feel clarity. I'm pretty good at the moment. I'm happy with where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Anyone else?
I'm good. I'm going for the ride. I'm keen to get this ride started. I can learn shit. Work for my shit.
Yeah. What's the shit that's been coming up?
Sorry?
What specifically has been coming up that you want to work through?
I have no. I mean, this year has just been basically, I've worked to getting everything where I want it to be, where I thought I want everything to be, and it's like, oh fuck, really? I mean, I just taken the advice from, being an activator. I need to fucking create. So it's like, right, so what am I going to create now? And, I now have this, okay, I have this idea of what I want to create. And because of that, I do work every day now. I can do work. I get quite a bit done. I'm motivated. It does. But it's still a bit of a letdown. When I started my PT business, what I wanted and what I have is more than what I want. What I wanted when I started, I thought so fucking small when I started. I thought so fucking tiny. And it's like it's taken me that long to realize, fuck, that was tiny what I wanted. It's nothing what I thought I wanted. And I've created that box when I first started with everything I've set, and now I really feel like a part of me wants to destroy what I've made just so I can start from scratch, because it's just fucking annoying me. But another part of me doesn't want to destroy what I've created because, fuck, I did work hard to get this.
Yeah. Pretty common. So especially for like activators as well, like when things become boring, it's like you'll unconsciously start to create mechanisms where you just start to sabotage everything or destroy things just to be able to get like something new occurring. So this can happen in relationships, it can happen in business, it can happen in like every area. So if we look at that tendency, what we need to do is we need to actually just create this mechanism of challenge within it so that we actually start to create this understanding of the evolution of what we're actually stepping into. So instead of like just destroying everything, we can allow it to unfold into the next thing and shift it quite a bit without getting to the point where we actually destroy every part of it. So
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah, exactly. It's what I have, change it to something different I have in my head.
yeah. And yeah, like part of what that comes down to is getting to the point of like starting to really embrace the birth and death cycle of every aspect of every experience that we have, and embracing the temporality of life. So ultimately that starts to come into what our relationship with death is. So when we look at the flow map that we can consistently refer back to in terms of where you're at, it's like I've got the results I wanted and it's not what I thought is 100% where you're at right now. And what we're really looking at doing is working through different components of going through the shadow work down here, but also embracing these components up here and shifting what our relationship with death actually is, because in the death of your current business model is part of the unfolding and the evolution of it stepping into what it can be in that instance. So what we get to do is we get to step back into the understanding of the importance of the destruction component in our life, as well as the birth of the new at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is your current relationship with death? Just like casual
The only thing
conversation.
which comes to my head is, the only answer was, well, I haven't experienced it yet, so I'm not quite sure. I'm pretty sure it's something I'm avoiding.
Yeah. Okay. So when we're looking at it in that context, you're talking about like personal physical death, which is a completely different, like that's only one tiny little aspect of it. So what we get to look at is the perspective of what it is on a micro level as well as a macro level. So ultimately what we're really looking at is like, what is our fear of death? When we look at this spectrum up here, our fear of death instantly creates this world of sabotage and mechanism, which means that we live in fear of death, which really means that we're not actually really living our life, because we're living it out of this fear of like it ultimately ending. So as we shift our relationship to what that is, it instantly starts to shift our perspective and allows us to have this big picture perspective as well as the micro perspective. So like this part of it is like we have this need to survive, which is an unconscious need. It's like I need to survive, which means that we're focused on survival rather than thriving, rather than serving, rather than creating an impact on the world. It's just focusing on like the basic human needs, which is inherently required. And when we actually start to get past that, we can actually start to access everything else. But when we're filtering it through this fear of death, it instantly creates this world of sabotage and low level frequency from which we create from. And when we can begin to actually transcend that and integrate that, it instantly means we can start to shift every aspect of what we're actually doing, because we're coming from a different place. We're coming from a place of appreciation for everything we get to experience and everything that gets to end. Because the biggest thing that ultimately holds us back is we're holding on to things which are already dead. We're holding on to a business model that's already dead. We're holding on to a relationship in terms of a friendship, which is dead. But we're trying to hit a dead horse, whatever the analogy is, whatever the saying is. And what that creates for us is just this world of trying to hold on to and recreate the past, which means that we ultimately just live in the past. We try and recreate every single moment that's given us pleasure in the past. We try and recreate avoiding every experience which was painful in the past, which means we actually just live in the past. So what we get to look at is how we can actually start to shift what that is and actually define what this fear of death really actually is. Because as we go through our developmental stages, there are certain things which occur. We can wait for us to gain a different perspective as we go through our life, or we have a near-death experience, which shifts our perspective, or we can actually consciously go through processes to actually fast-track that process. It's very predictable what we do as humans. At the age of 2, we start to develop our identity, start to develop our ego. We finally realize, holy shit, I'm not this bottle of water. I'm separate to that. I have my own identity. I'm my own thing. And this is created through our experience of our sensations. We have a sensation of, okay, this is different to what me is. We go through the next developmental stage of going through the teenage years, where we start to develop our identity outside of our family unit. We start to rebel against that family unit. We want to create this mechanism of belonging to our family unit, but also belonging elsewhere at the same time. So we rebel against the family unit. We start to expand outside of that. We move into the adulthood kind of phase, where we move into mating and business and creating the life that we want to create. And eventually then it starts to go to the point where we actually start to move into more of a spiritual phase, where we focus on more of what's going to happen after I die. This is the natural stage of developments that we actually go through as humans. And we can actually start to look at that from a different perspective, rather than just being stuck in the middle. We can actually bring that perspective around what we're here to create in the world much closer to where we are now. And it starts to have a look at and actually start conversations around what our relationship with death is. Because when we look at what death is, it's ultimately one of these things which is just one of the shadows in society. We don't really talk about it much. And yet, technically, we deal with it on a daily basis. We deal with it on a moment-by-moment basis. Every single moment is the ending of one moment and the birth of a new one. And we start to actually embrace this unfolding of experience. We start to actually be with what is in terms of the flux and flow of what is, rather than trying to hold on to what was. And the rate at which we can actually start to embrace this is based on how much of our identity is wrapped up in that. So what we get to look at in that instance is what are our core identities which are actually creating this world of limitation for us. Any ideas?
I missed that, sorry. It broke up a bit.
What are our core identities that we can't unconsciously buy into, which are creating an unwillingness for us to truly create what we want to create in the world? Any ideas?
Would one of them be that we have this, there's like the two parts to the self, but we have this idea that we are finite, that we end, as for insofar as like we think that when our body ceases to exist and have life, that also means that like there's a part of us that believes that we also die with it, that we're not infinite in our nature, even though our true nature is.
Maybe. What else?
I feel like we've just created so many limitations around our like infinite potential. I feel like we seek externally for where our limitations are, and we see this kind of perpetuated in society where, I don't know if you guys have heard of, like, I think it's the 4 Minute Mile guy or whatever he is. Cody, you'd probably know him, and you guys would know him too, being PTs. But essentially what we do as humans is we wait for someone to essentially push a new limitation or create a new limitation. And then that's a collective agreement that, oh, okay, a human is capable of this thing, which expands us, but it's always restricted by that external limitation. There's only like the majority of us, I wouldn't say, are able to kind of inwardly go on the journey of like limitlessness. I'm probably not explaining that really well, but yeah, I just feel like we're so restricted by the limitations that we've placed on ourselves because of our conditioning from birth, essentially. And it's very subjective.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at all of that conditioning, what do you think the core conditioning components are of who that we believe that we are in our lives right now?
So if I was to speak into it in terms of a personal one, or are you meaning more sort of collectively?
It's going to be the same for everyone. You're going to have like a specific content which is appropriate to you, but we also have collective things which we buy into.
Yeah, true. Mine would be, or I would say one of the ones that plays out quite frequently for me is the idea that, and it comes back to the not enough piece, it's like this idea that I have to be doing something or achieving something, or there's constantly always like some sort of futuristic projection of my life. That the very existence is not enough, the very doing is not enough, sorry, being is not enough, the doing is what comes into it, I would say.
Cool. So when you meet someone, what do you say?
I missed that, sorry Cody, you dropped out.
So when you meet someone for the first time, what is it you say? So when you meet someone for the first time, what's the first thing that you say to
What
someone?
was the kid screaming? Sorry.
Yeah.
When I meet someone for the first time,
what is it you say to them?
I didn't get the last bit. That's such a great question. I don't think I've ever observed that. Normally it would just be like, I would introduce myself if they were a stranger. Yeah, like, hey, my name's Cassie, handshake, eye gaze.
Yeah. So like all of our identities are wrapped up in different components. And the core one is just like our name instantly creates this entire world of who that we believe that we are. All of our conditioning is aligned in with that. It's like, oh, I'm Cassie, and this is where I live. This is what I do for work.
Yeah.
And then another core identity that we won't instantly necessarily say it is like, what's our relationship status? It's like, these are three core things which define who we are, that we will fight tooth and nail to keep in place in most instances. And it's all wrapped up in exactly what you said earlier. It's like wrapped up in our name, but it's also wrapped up in who we are. It's wrapped up in all of our societal conditioning. It's wrapped up in all of these different components. So when we get to the core understanding of like what our fear of death is, our fear of death is not necessarily a physical death. It's the death of our personality, our identity, our ego. Because that's where all the suffering occurs. When a relationship dies, then That's the death of our ego, the death of who we defined ourselves as. That's where all the suffering comes from it. When someone dies in our life, the same thing occurs. Like when I went through the experience of my mum dying, it's like that was 20 something years of my life of identity, which was never going to be the same again. That was the death of that.
Yeah.
And there's also the resistance of that shift. There's the resistance of that change. There's the want for that to be how it was previously and the holding on to that. And yet all that does is it takes away from my present experience. And the same thing that when we look at that on a macro level, occurs on a micro level. So what we get to look at is the understanding that all of our suffering is created through our identities that we hold on to, that we will fight tooth and nail to keep. So I want you to like justify why you live where you live. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll go. Justifying the way I live.
Where
and
you live.
why.
Where?
Oh, where.
Yeah.
Justifying it because it's a great place. Sunshine Coast, obviously. It's got a lot to offer. Yeah, obviously the beaches. I think the community and the people are a little bit different than say let's go near City, Brisbane. Lived for like 10 years, and people up here are a lot more relaxed and chilled out, which play a good part, and within business, not so much, I suppose, in here as well. Yeah, it's just a beautiful place. Gone.
Yeah.
Nope, he's back.
Cool. So why do you live where you live for?
It's dropped out.
Why do you live where you live for?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear any of that. It broke out. Yep, gotcha.
Why do you live where you live for?
Why do I live where I live? Funny, when you first said that, I was actually thinking suburb, and then when Sean answered, I was thinking, oh fuck, I didn't even think about why I live in Townsville. So now I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, the first thing which came to mind was why do I live where I live, the house that I live, because it was I liked the house. It was a nice low cost house in a suburb I really liked. It's right near a river. It's quiet. There's only one way in and out of the suburb, and it just had a nice vibe when I checked it out. But now when I think about it, like, why do I live in Townsville? I don't know, actually. That was actually a question I've probably asked myself 100 times in the last month. So now, actually, after hearing Sean's answer, I'm actually thinking to myself, oh, fuck, Townsville. All right, I don't know. I live here because, basically, I live here because I know my son enjoys it here. He's got family he sees. He loves his grandparents. He has a great time here. We've got so much here for him. Created so much here for him. He's probably only home 2 days of the week. Otherwise, yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. What about you, Cassie? Why do you live where you live?
Sorry, you got me with a mouthful of food. I'm really hungry.
Typical activator, always eating.
Yeah, it's kind of people are like, where does it go? I was like, bro, you don't understand my energy levels. Like, they don't turn off. Yeah, I probably live I live on the Gold Coast, same as you, Cody. Beaches are amazing. The community's epic. We have access to mountains. We have access to like airports. It's a little bit quieter than a large city, which I really like. Like, you can still go to places, and there's that. Yeah, I find there's that. It's a quieter environment than say somewhere like Brisbane, for example. Yeah, I really like it. My body or my nervous system feels relaxed here compared to other places that I've lived.
Cool. Thank you for sharing.
All right.
So how much time, energy, and effort do we really put into thinking about where we live?
I have in the last year or so.
Why is that?
Sort of making decisions whether I move back to Brisbane, try and set up PT back down there, or move out of this career into something else and move sort of more up towards like Ellie Beach, Yeppoon or something like that, sort of create that kind of lifestyle, different lifestyle. But yeah, I love the Sunshine Coast. Yeah, feels like home.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at peace here.
Love it. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at we live where we live because it's coherent with our current identity. We live where we live because it's coherent with our current identity. We work in the business or in the job that we have because it's coherent with our current identity.
Totally will make sense.
And the core addiction that we have as humans is identity coherence. That can show up in different flavors, like the flavor of the need to be right, the need to look good. It all comes down to this need for identity coherence. Now, what happens is our identity is consistently shifting all the time, but we will only allow it to shift a certain amount. And it takes a lot for us to change our career or change where we live. And yet there are some people who have the identity of being a nomad. It's a different identity. It means they can shift through that much more. What we're really starting to look at is how many of these identities have I started to embody without question? And is that really what I want?
Kind of like what I was going through. I knew that making a move or a shift would change me, and I'd have to be a different person in that environment. And I wasn't comfortable with that. Yeah.
We become addicted to what's comfortable for us. And when we understand what our addictions are, we can actually start to create shifts. Because if we're completely unaware that it's all just based on an identity coherence, well, we're in the questioning of it without having the commitment to create the thing that we actually want to create. Identity coherence is how we sell out on our goals. Because we have this desire, this want to create something in the world, to have an impact on the world, to create a legacy in the world, and at the same time, if that's incongruent with what our identity is, we will unconsciously start to sabotage ourselves to come back to whatever our energetic holding capacity is in terms of our identities. Now, if I was to try and convince you that where you live was the worst place to live, you would instantly just defend what your position is. Because your identity needs to be congruent. You're unwilling to allow parts of you to die for that to actually shift what your reality is. When we look at this, this plays into the need to be right, which comes up here at the director level. We look up here, we're looking at the fear of death here, but we're also starting to go through, okay, the need to be right here. Okay, well, that's starting to play out as well. The need to belong or fit in is still here as well. All of these things are just different expressions that we're looking at, different identities that we buy into. An identity of the need to struggle, of the need to fit in with my family unit, with the people that are most important to me. All to be right about who you believe that you are, not who you actually are, who you believe that you are. And then this filters through with this fear of death, of all of these things dying. What would happen if your needs to be right died? Then what? Well, maybe you just have no conflict in your life. What would happen if the need to struggle died?
Wouldn't struggle anymore.
Well, all that would be left would be peace, right?
Yep.
The need to look good died. Well, then you'd no longer be putting on an act. You'd actually just be who you truly are at your core essence. And you'd actually just bring the gifts that you actually inherently have available to you based on your biology, based on your epigenetics, and actually bring those things to the world and create what you're here to create. When we're looking at this framework, we're really looking at a framework of conditioning that we've all been through, that we're just starting to work through to unlock what our biologic and epigenetic potential actually is. We each have this latent potential within us, which is crying to be expressed into the world. And as we shift what our model of the world is, the place that we come from, everything begins to shift. Make sense? So how does it all end for us? Where do we all end up?
Not here. Right here.
Well, we all
Depends
end up
what
in,
you're talking about. End, like the end of this conversation, or
the end of life.
that's a lot long. The end of life, as we kind of know it. Yeah.
Yeah. Where do we end up? There's really only two places. What are they?
Nowhere or somewhere.
Neither here or there.
How cryptic do you want us to get, King?
So when we start to embrace the temporality of life, we realize that the two places that we can end up is a cemetery or a crematorium. And when we can actually start to embrace that, then we can start to truly embrace what we're here to create within that lifespan. That's not to say that there's not components after that, but the more that we play into that conversation, the more mental masturbation occurs for us. The more that we speculate on those things, the more that we start to intellectualize things and not actually create within this time frame that we have to be able to create.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this becomes the conversation that we get to really have. It's like, Cassie, how often do you experience death in your work?
5 days a week. 5 days a week. Yeah.
It's a very unique perspective. And when you communicate with nurses, they have a different perspective on death. And it's also one of the things which is not actually communicated in your studies. It's not communicated how prevalent it will be if you're in the healthcare system. And what it instantly does is it just creates a true awareness of the value of the limited time that we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we can start to see the gift that is within the depth of every aspect of every experience that we have, when we start to actually access the full spectrum of what that is for us. Because most of the time in life, the irony, most of the time in our experience, we appreciate the birth of things, not so much the death of things. And yet every death creates the new birth of something new. It's the unfolding of it. It's the shifting of who we are into who we're meant to be. Like, and when we really get to it, it's that journey from the unmanifest to the manifest to the unmanifest. And in the language that you guys were talking about before, it's a journey of the space of no thing to something and returning to nothing. And when we can see the beauty in every single one of those steps and the unfolding of that and seeing the requirement of each of those things, we can start to love this spectrum rather than this tiny little part over here. When we can appreciate every aspect along that spectrum, everything starts to shift for us. Our experience of the experience starts to shift. Make sense? So what about grief?
In the terms of, yeah.
So when we look at experiences, feelings, sensations that we actually have in our heart, we have both appreciation and grief. Physiologically, we feel that like in our heart. And if we're activators, then we're going to feel that much more than other people. Because we're feeling beings. So when we experience that, we can experience it as grief or appreciation. Based on the place that we come from within that. If our intention that we're putting into that is one of loss, we experience grief. When we can have appreciation for every experience that we had, it allows us to instantly come from a different energetic frequency. The experience is still the same, but our experience of the experience shifts. So has anyone had an experience where someone in their life, like a family member, has died? Has anyone had that experience?
Yep.
Yep.
So part of the biggest limitation with grief is an experience that most people don't necessarily communicate, which is an experience of longing. And this experience of longing is one of, oh, I just wish I could have a conversation with this person again. Little things, little ways that person was, which instantly creates that longing experience, which is not talked about, creates the majority of our suffering with grief. Because we believe that part of it is not actually normal. Like, I should just be able to move on with my life. Rather than create the appreciation of the remembering of that experience. But when we can appreciate something, it appreciates. And when we guilt or shame or should an emotion or an experience, it perpetuates that entire experience. We end up in a downward spiral.
Mhm.
Always cracks me up just to see what people write down, because I have like just because some of the things are just like just talking away and people are writing down, and then like it's just a weird experience for people to like write notes on certain things, which like obviously hits a chord with them. And it's like, what did I say again? It's just funny. It's my mind just going off into random tangents as usual. So when we look at this experience of grief, we ultimately get to see the purpose of it and create appreciation of it. When we see the purpose of it and see that it is inherently required for us to actually access appreciation, we start to understand the importance of the temporality of life. For on the other side of grief is appreciation. It's gratitude. And we get to choose how long we sit in grief and cycle in it and make it wrong. And we also get to choose when we start to come from an appreciation of it. We get to choose what we make it mean. So imagine if you could look at the temporality of your life knowing that it's inevitable, that it will end at some point. And begin to actually appreciate that. But when we do that, everything begins to actually shift. The place that we come from no longer comes from a fear of the death of everything. It becomes from appreciation of the fact that we even have it and that will also leave us at some stage. When you can embrace that every single important person in your life at some point will leave your life, whether that's through them leaving physically or them dying or you dying, the place that you come from is that place of deep appreciation for the experience that you have, for the time that you have, knowing that it's also temporary. When we can embrace that temporality of life and even love the temporality of life because we embrace it, because we see what it actually creates for us. We see that it actually creates the gateway to the appreciation for everything that we actually have in our life and want in our life. And part of our capacity to receive in life is based on us appreciating what we already have. When we can appreciate everything which we already have, what we appreciate appreciates. And what that says to the universe, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is I'm open to receiving more because I can actually appreciate what I've already got. You're closed to receiving more. That is only based on a lack of appreciation for what you've already got. So as we shift our perspective, as we shift our place that we come from, we start to attract and magnetize more of the things that we want because we've come from appreciation of the things that we already have. Make sense? Any questions with that?
Nope.
I'm just gonna go. I'm appreciating all of the noise around me today in the airport. So what we get to look at is, what is the one part of my experience that I don't want to appreciate? And to get like deeper than that is, what's the one person in my life that I don't want to forgive? Because if we forgive, then that means that we actually feel the grief, which means that we get to the point of appreciation. Like I might have to. So who's the person that you don't want to forgive? Where is this? So when we look at this, we don't forgive people because we don't want to actually experience the feelings and the sensations around something, which then means that we start to appreciate what that actually is as we start to have felt that. When that goes from feel to felt, then we actually start to increase our receptivity. So when we inquire into who's the one person that I want to forgive the least in the world, that's the one area that you're holding on to the most resentment in your life, which is blocking your ability to be able to attract, manifest, and receive the things you actually want in your life. So who is that person for you? Cassie. Everyone was just like, fuck, don't pick me. Don't pick me.
Oh, I was
Don't pick me.
trying to just
I'm going to keep my face as still as possible. I can see into your minds, guys. I'm going to keep my face as still as possible. I'm going to make it look like I'm thinking.
Look like that. Definitely think.
So, Cassie.
Yeah, so interesting. My initial reaction was myself.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is like, if I was to sit with that and like feeling into and sitting with it, I would, yeah. It's like past versions of myself.
Mhm. And who outside of yourself?
Honestly, no one really comes to mind. I'm trying to like think back to like partners that I've had, but that's no emotional charge there. Like my mum and my dad, it's not. I think because I've done work around these things, I don't have that emotional like charge there with, well, no one comes to mind anyway. It was really like instantaneous. You asked the question, and I was like, the person that is me. There's like still that piece there for me, but no one external to me really came through, and I'm not feeling anyone that's like really present with that. So I need to probably sit with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah.
Who's the person that has hurt you the most in your life?
My dad. Mm.
So we have this experience called adolescent amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout our childhood, we forget a lot of the things which have ultimately occurred, especially in the imprint parts of our lives. So when we think about the core of the person that we're most unwilling to forgive, it's normally one of our parents. And the natural tendency for people who are in the personal development space to instantly go to is, I've done forgiveness work here, I've done all these different things, which is a conscious process. And when we look at who hurt you the most, then we start to get to some of the underlying things without even necessarily going to the memories of like what did or didn't happen, because it's based on what we made it mean. So part of that is like, who do you have to be to make your dad proud?
Oh, you're actually asking me that question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought it was rhetorical. Never mind. um, let me. Yeah, it's. I guess the easiest way to describe it would be to be just like a copied version of his belief systems, like nothing outside of that would be challenging. So yeah, like essentially like not have my own voice, not have my own belief system, certainly not be empowered.
So
Yeah, constantly. Yeah, sorry. Go on.
so like you can't be empowered to be loved by your dad.
Yeah, like the way that I would receive it is if I was like if I was to basically my power and be really in that around, then that would cause a lot of friction, and that would cause a lot of like my perception of rejection. It would be like, I can't be around you, like, and I would be wronged in whatever way he would do that.
Mm-hmm. So like even in that, what you're communicating is that I would be wronged, which is a perspective that you take based on how you define what that is. Like the story that you tell yourself is that I would be wronged based on that. And then that defines how lovable that you are and how good you are or not good enough you are. So what did your dad want you to be when you grew up?
Basically not in existence, like not there, invisible. Never really wanted kids, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, like not speaking, not being too loud, or not being like seen. Yeah,
Okay.
basically existing.
So how much of a burden do you see yourself as?
These days, like currently, no, I don't think that I'm a burden. I don't. I can acknowledge that there would still be parts of me that probably play that out, but I would say more on like a conscious level. I don't feel that.
Yep. And
I
where,
don't feel that. And yeah, I can see. Yeah.
so just as you like, one of the things that we start to notice, especially when you start to do more work, is you can consciously become aware of things. And what we're really looking at doing, especially for activators, is looking at where you feel that in your body. So when I say you're noticing the sensations of feeling like a burden, And when you bring consciousness to your breath around that, where do you feel that in your body?
Like lower abdomen, like pit of stomach, I would say. Yeah, lower abdomen.
Yeah. And the sensation
Yeah,
of that.
because I instantly shifted.
Like when you notice and sit with the sensation of that, what do you notice?
There's like a I would say almost like a sick feeling.
So we filter our reality through our sensations. And when we try and change our sensations, we create loops which play out for us. And a loop is an experience where we've had an experience, but it hasn't been time stamped. So it's just running through our system. So when you have that experience of that sensation in your body, it's just an indication of a part of you which has been, I'm gonna have to, so when we have this experience, we have this experience of a part of us, which is not a part, it's a part, as in away from us. So when it's apart from us, when it's part of who we are, but we're trying to hide it from the world, or we're trying to hide it from ourselves. This is how we create shadows. And often it's not necessarily an experience, it's just a sensation in our body, it's just a feeling. And as we go through the experience of feeling those things, we actually create that going from being apart, as in away from, to returning to just being a part of us. Because when it's apart from us or away from us, we're putting all our time, energy, and effort into putting on an act that is not a part of us, which ultimately just drains us. Basically just takes our life force energy to put it into the act that we're putting on. So part of the process that we start to go through is what we call doing subtle body work, which is the experience of the sensations in your body, which are apart, away from us. But when we experience those sensations, then they became apart again. And when they become, I just need to make sure that I show it at all times. When they become apart, then we realize that it's just a part of the whole version of us. Because when it's apart, we see ourselves as broken and needing to be fixed and incomplete. When we integrate each of these individual parts by feeling the sensations of them without the need to shift them, then it becomes a part of us again. And this is the difference between doing like conscious understanding of things and actually integrating things back into our body. So like when we think about extreme, like the bridge in extreme, it's very much the reason why it works is because it's integrating the things back into your body by actually going through somatic processes. Because if we only ever go through the experience of the intellectualizing of things, which is, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
So part of this process is the process of embodying each of these individual components by actually going through the sensation part of it. So ultimately what we're really doing is we're just going into a meditative process so that we can actually just experience the sensations and just go through the peaks and troughs of those. And what that does is it allows those to be complete, and we can return to that just being a part of us rather than away from us. So as part of the process for the homework is going to be just going through like a meditative process for so like 10 minutes. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So part of the homework is going to be going through a meditative process for 10 minutes, just being with the sensations as you start to think about different components of people that you no longer, people that you don't necessarily want to forgive, or people that have hurt you the most, or any of those components, or how you see yourself as a burden. Well, that's instantly going to create a sensational response in your body. And normally what our normal response is, I don't want to feel that, I'm going to push that to the side. And when we feel it, it becomes felt and it's complete. When we don't feel it and we suppress it or we repress it or we go into projection by creating a story, it ends up running us. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the homework's going to be doing that 10 minutes a day. Now, the most common question is, do I need a memory to go back to be able to do that? And the answer is no. Often what we think that we need to do is we need to go through our traumas again and again and again, which is not actually what we're looking at doing. What we're looking at doing is just experiencing the sensations which come up for us. Following so far? So when we're going through this experience, we're going through the pendulation of it. So we go to experience the sensation and then we come back. We go to experience the sensation and then we come back. We go to experience the sensation and then come back. And how it will work is we go to a sensation, it will come in a peak, a wave, and then it'll crash. It'll come in a peak and then it'll crash. And eventually those will just become so small that it's just normal. So when we experience the sensation of feeling the sensation of being a burden in this instance, it's going to be higher, and then it's going to go to nothingness. And then it's going to come back, and then it's going to come to nothingness. And then eventually it's just flat. That's ultimately what we're looking at getting to. We're getting to that point of it being integrated as part of who we are again, on a sensation level rather than just an intellectual level. Make sense?
Totally.
Cool. It's going to be it for today then. So what I'd recommend for that is, number one, who's the person who hurt you the most? Being with that sensation. Burden, what do you hate most about yourself? And the final one will just be like a personal one, which is being with the sensation of what it would actually be like to forgive yourself. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Cool. Job done then. Thanks for bearing with me with the airport cutouts and extra noise. Until next week then, hey?
Thanks, Cody.
No worries.